Hello, I'm Charlie Worsham, your host for Mississippi on the Map, a podcast brought to you by Visit Mississippi. This podcast explores why Mississippi is the birthplace of America's music. Welcome back to Mississippi on the Map. Today I am particularly honored to be sitting with this guy right here. I call you a Mississippi Bamian to an extent. He is a 10-time CMA Musician of the Year, and he just headlined at the Ryman Auditorium, y'all, the one and only Mac McAnally.
How's it going, everybody? That's you make it sound more impressive than I feel like it is, but I'm awfully glad to be here.
Well, I'm glad to have you here. And one of my favorite quotes is a C.S. Lewis quote that the longest way around is the shortest way home. And I look to you personally for a lot of inspiration, in part because we share some geography in our roots, but in large part because you wear all the hats. You are a consummate musician and singer and songwriter. You can stand in the spotlight. You can stand 10 feet off to the side of the spotlight. You do a little bit of it all, and those are my favorite people. And I think it's the longest way around to find the shortest way home when you are cut from that cloth, because who you are and what you represent in our community didn't exist before. And you've been kind of like the guy in the jungle with the machete, just carving that path for guys like me to come behind and find out my own place. So how does it feel to be this far into your music journey? And do you feel like you're finally making your way home?
Well, you know, I can only speak to my own vantage point in that, but I'm grateful for every step of the whole deal. And coming from Mississippi, you know this too. We were the whole state has sort of an agricultural mindset, and we were, you know, raised in farm people. Whether my dad was a school teacher and my mom was a gospel piano player that worked at the Wrangler factory, but it was mainly because we couldn't make a living farming. That, you know, we were all displaced farmers, and we're sort of educated to think that it's not a positive character trait to call attention to yourself, which makes show business an ironic and also ill fit for almost
tricky
all of us.
Endeavor.
It is.
Yeah.
It's a tricky thing, and so every little bit of spotlight that's ever been thrown on me, I pretty much have to call home and apologize about it, just because of the nature that we came up. But I'm particularly grateful to have been able to do my favorite thing. Starting when I was 13, I've done this for a living and kept a light bill paid somewhere the whole time, and I get to do it again tomorrow, which has really been my primary goal the whole time. The rewards, you know, as you know, and congratulations on your Musician of the Year as well. Those Mississippians root for one another also.
Yes, we do.
As you know, I'm very proud of you, and I've ran all these years with Jimmy Buffett, who's another Mississippian who's been exaggerating my Musicians of the Year. Ever since I had 2, he started saying there was 5 of them, and then when I got 5, he started saying 10.
The power of manifestation, right there. Yeah.
Well, when we finally got the 10th one, he called me the day after and said, you know, there's a lesson in this. Sometimes when I'm spouting bullshit, it's about to come true.
Well, you know, I've often said, if I can pen my own quote here, or coin my own phrase, you know, that I think one of the gifts of being from Mississippi is that, you know, one of the only things bigger than our mosquitoes are our stories. You know, we're really all storytellers.
It is a story place. It is.
You're a literary figure or a songwriter or an actor. It comes down to telling a story, because we live big stories, however small that agricultural-based life might be based on.
One of my prose writer buddies has a line. He said he asked his dad in his teen years, he said, what is the deal about Mississippi, Daddy? And his dad said, well, I like what his dad said. His dad said, well, son, it's like God took the best of everything good and the worst of everything bad and stirred it up in a pot and dumped it out between Memphis and New Orleans.
Wow. That's
pretty good.
Yeah. Too bad that doesn't quite fit on a bumper sticker, because I'd have that on the hood of or the bumper of my car.
We just need a double wide car when we're there.
Yeah. So take me back. You mentioned your mom. I didn't know the Wrangler factory part, but that's something that has kept country music singers in business that Mississippi had a hand in I never knew about. But take me back to that Belmont First Baptist Church and those early experiences of music. I too, my mom, her career has been in education as a teacher, but she paid for her first car teaching piano lessons, playing in church. And I know that from Mississippi, there's a tight relationship between Saturday night and Sunday morning. Tell me about those Sunday mornings. Tell me about that piano bench.
Well, she was a really fine musician, natural talent, and played. It's probably another podcast, but she played the old shape notes, old school,
yes.
Which is all totally lost art at this point. And shape notes are essentially the same thing as our Nashville number system. Interesting deal. Another conversation.
A type of musical shorthand, really.
It is, yeah. It's written on music paper, but there's a shape for every do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. So even though you're looking at the music that's written out in sheet music, you can play in any key from looking at the shapes, and that's the way my mom played. And consequently, because she was good, when the gospel quartets would come across our part of North Mississippi, rather than carrying an accompanist with them in those days, they would have one that they trusted to go 75 miles.
Yeah.
And they'd pick her up at the Alabama line and go toward Memphis or the other direction. And she'd play with the Spear family or the Blackwood brothers. And then as soon as they got out of her radius, they'd pick up somebody else. Well, but because she could play everything in every key, it probably got her some gigs. And probably also the fact that she never charged anybody a penny got her gigs too, because
I guess so.
She just felt like she played every wedding and every funeral and every all-day singing. And being, you said Baptist church, the Baptists have a thing called association, which is kind of like a preacher competition. Will be a full day of about 9 preachers.
Yeah,
that's 9 sermons, hellfire brimstone, interrupted by a song at the end of every one of them and a piece of fried chicken in the middle.
Yeah.
And I sat on the end of the bench as a toddler through 6 or 7 years old, watching my mom, sit there all day through that. And I heard a lot of music and I heard a lot of preaching, and which is also storytelling.
Yeah.
And that certainly influenced whatever kind of writer I am.
I was going to say, how would that have inspired you as a writer?
It inspired me probably as I don't want to say a judgment of storytellers, but it's always has impressed me how much better a storyteller is that lets the listener draw the final conclusion. If I tell you how something is, it doesn't go in as deep to you as if you figure out how it is because of something I said.
Yeah, kind of in a sentence, show don't tell.
Exactly. You get somebody up to the point where they can close the deal, and then it's a collaboration between a storyteller and a listener. And I sat around, I listened to those preaching competitions, and I sat around the courthouse in Belmont, and the old men that whittle and exaggerate for a living. That's pretty much who could tell the wildest story and keep the straightest face.
Yeah.
I sat around those guys partially because I was told not to, but I learned from those guys too, and took things from preachers who were trying to get a gig. They're trying to knock a local preacher out of his job at those association deals. But the combination of music and the fear of God and all of that combined into a strong impression on a young kid, and I carry it with me still.
I would have to think too that it'd be an influence on your songwriting. But if you've ever sat through a Southern Baptist sermon, there's an element of performance in that.
Absolutely,
as well.
No question. And there's melody.
Yeah.
I think we've touched on this before, but there's melody in conversation.
Yeah.
And there's certainly melody in storytelling. There's a natural rise and a fall in how you make a point or skirt one.
Yeah.
And you don't have to follow that when you're writing a song, but it's been my experience that if you can mimic aspects of a good storyteller as you write a melody, it plays as more real. The song seems more like real life. Right. And sometimes songs need to be the opposite of real life. Sometimes they need to be fantasy and escapism, and Buffett did that really well too.
Yeah.
But he was definitely a storyteller in a high level one, and being able to sit at his feet for a few decades certainly didn't hurt anything of mine. And
Sure, of
it
course.
is, that I'm certain that something about that is what made us hook up and keep working together all those years. He was like my big brother,
Yeah, I definitely want to get to that. While we're talking about songwriting,
Yeah.
I'm curious if a particular lyric over all these years and all these songs feels like the most Mississippi lyric you ever wrote.
I got a few to choose from.
Yeah.
But I was pretty tickled that I ended up making excrete be a rhyme word in a song. I was warned that my life should be nothing more than to eat and excrete and die. I'm not saying that's 100% Mississippi,
Yeah.
but I wouldn't have written that anywhere else, I don't think.
Well, I think about, you've written some big songs for Kenny Chesney. I think about Down the Road and him featuring you on that. And man, talk about a spotlight you had to apologize for. It's not something you asked for. It kind of reminds me of that origin story of how you and Jimmy Buffett first met. So many times you've been approached. Kenny Chesney approaches you as a fan. Jimmy Buffett approached you, 19 years old, as a fan of your records, the records you were making, and writes to you, says, we're both storytellers. We're both from Mississippi. We're going to be friends. Well, out of him writing to you like that, do you remember that first time y'all met in person, what it was like, where y'all were?
I remember seeing that note because I was in Los Angeles, which for me at that time might as well have been Mars.
Yeah.
I'd never really been anywhere, and I only wore my grandfather's hand-me-down overalls because they were soft, and that's all that I had. And I was in L.A. signing a record deal, and I had pretty much a Scottish afro because I didn't know about conditioner yet, and this is late 70s, which was in L.A. was disco.
Yeah.
So I couldn't have fit in less than I did. Didn't know anybody in the business, and people were telling me I was better than I knew I was. So my compass was all out of whack. And I got this note from Jimmy. The guy that gave me my record deal is the same guy that gave Jimmy his first record deal, and he sent Jimmy a copy of my first album before it came out. He heard it before it got released.
Now, where was Jimmy in his journey at that time? Was he a big deal already?
He had Come Monday and Why Don't We Get Drunk and Screw, so people knew who he was.
Yeah.
But he had just recorded. He was just recording Margaritaville Changes in Latitudes. That album was getting made with Norbert.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't the giant headliner yet. He was still opening for folks for the most part. He said those nice things, and because I looked up to him, I'd already learned a couple of his songs in the front porch in Mississippi, and I would have rooted for him just because he's from Mississippi, but I also noticed he was also pretty good.
Yeah.
The Pirate's still one of my favorite songs. He's got a bunch of my favorite songs.
Yeah.
And because he was such a great entertainer, he doesn't always get credit for the writer that he is as well. That was the first time that somebody that I definitely respected musically in the business
Get that affirmation.
gave me encouragement and affirmation. And he said, whenever we're in the same town, whenever we cross paths, you're going to come and hang in with me, and I'm going to sing some of your songs, and I bet we make music together. And, I didn't know whether he meant that or not, but it didn't matter. It just because it was somebody I looked up to, it lifted me up in a good way. And it turns out what seemed like an exaggeration in his note, we did lots more than all of that. And I learned so much, and I've gone so many places and he believed in me way before I believed in myself. So I wouldn't be here talking to you today if it weren't for him. He had enough confidence and ambition, for several of us.
Yeah.
And I was lacking in those things. I love music, but mainly I was just a kid walking around L.A. freaked out, and I was the first McAnally to get on an airplane.
Yeah. I don't have this exact same particulars, but I can relate to being a first in the family from Mississippi. First time I remember crossing state lines, we were visiting family in Texas, and I refused to eat the ravioli from the grocery store in Texas because I wanted the Grenada, Mississippi ravioli. I thought it was different. But fast forward to when I was about that same age and finding myself in Boston going to school. And the culture shock of that, and then moving to Nashville, which I'd obviously known. We'd spent a lot of time making trips to Nashville growing up, and I was bit by the music bug early. But the point I'm getting at is, I think when you're from a place like Mississippi and you first venture outside the walls, so to speak, boy, you see where you're from in a brand new light.
Absolutely.
What has that felt like over the years as you've traveled the world and experienced more than most people do in a lifetime, being from such a historic place, a place of influence when it comes to American music and culture? Do you remember some of those first takeaways, being in LA or some other far corner of the world and being from Mississippi and thinking, wow, I never realized this about home, but when I get back home, blank, you know?
You sort of get it drilled in your head where we're either first or 50th in almost everything in Mississippi, and not all of it's good. We're the least educated and the most obese, and
but also per capita, a lot of Grammy wins
lots
in
of
there.
Grammys, lots of Pulitzers and Nobels, and I, although I knew that, I was a Faulkner fan and a Welty fan, and so many writers and so much music that had come from there. It's easy to, because of the national perception of your state, it's easy to feel yourself at a disadvantage. When I got out in the world and got more aware of the music and the literature that, not that it just come from Mississippi, but that it come from everywhere, and how high in that haystack the Mississippi stuff sat or sits, it made me feel some advantage that I did not necessarily perceive sitting on the front porch in Tishomingo County growing up. And I have tried since then to pass along to folks that are endeavoring our same thing. Everything seems really hypothetical if you're in the poorest state in the country or one of the poorest states, thinking I might have something to say to the whole world. It seems hypothetical. But the fact that so many of us have succeeded at that and have done that and made a mark or a living or whatever it is that is an elevation of any kind from it, it should be an encouragement to the ones that follow. And I've tried to pass that along, because I know I was so bashful. I would never have gone to Nashville from Belmont. Mm-hmm. And that's 2.5 hours, 3 hours away. But I wouldn't have had the nerve to go there. Thankfully for me, Muscle Shoals existed less than an hour away, and I could go there and fail and be back home by supper time, and it wasn't that big of a deal, right. And that's another part of straddling the state line, as you mentioned earlier. So Muscle Shoals was a necessary place for me, and just because of the physics of it, because I was not somebody who grew up saying I want out of this town. I loved where I grew up. I loved the people there. Loved my family. I had a Mayberry kind of existence. I realize not everybody does.
Yeah.
When you have that particular angle on a small community, it gives you the chance to see how everything you do affects everybody you know and care about.
Right.
And how it's, even if there's somebody you don't care for in that community, it's still better to treat them with respect than it is to openly disrespect them. And that's a harder thing to see in a sea of millions of people.
That's right.
I don't blame people from giant cities and metropolitan areas for not figuring that out. That's an easier thing for us to figure out.
We don't have as much insulation back home. I remember reading a great foreword to a book about Mississippians that Morgan Freeman wrote, and of course a Mississippian himself.
Exactly.
And I know that he talked about, when I was a young man, I felt a lot of ill will from my experiences in Mississippi, and felt like it was a place where there was so much bigotry and racism. But then he said, I went to Chicago and I went to other cities, and I realized, no, it's everywhere. It's just everywhere. Like the good is everywhere. Yeah. And but the difference is that in Mississippi, there is a sort of an honesty and taking things at face value. Yep. There isn't the sneaky part of that so much, where one thing's said to your face and another behind your back. And I think that something about that has integrity to it, that is a part of the character of being from Mississippi. And,
no, I agree. And I'll borrow a line that came from a story out of my life to another Mississippian, Paul Overstreet, and our buddies.
Yes,
and
another great songwriter
songwriter from Mississippi. But we were talking about how that fueled what we are. And I told him a thing. My dad had an ulcer and almost died when I was like 7, 8, 9 years old. It's right in there. I'm not good with chronology, but right around there.
Yeah.
And during the time when we would have normally been planting. And like I said, he was a school teacher, but we had like 5 acres of stuff that we planted, a couple of acres of peanuts for some unknown reason. And everything that was hard to harvest, we planted it.
Yeah.
But during the time we planted, my dad was in the hospital for like over 5 weeks, so we didn't plant. And he was not supposed to live, but he lived. We got him back home. Felt so good about having him home. I was feeling good about life in a way that I had not been, because he was my hero. And I just decided I was going to take off walking down through the woods. And I walked down to where we always had our garden stuff, and it was all planted and up. And we didn't do any of it. And nobody ever told us that they did it. No neighbor said we did that. That just was done. And Lyman McAnally's 2 acres of peanuts that nobody had an idea why he planted was 2 acres of peanuts. Wow. And I told Paul that, because that's one of my favorite things. That sounds like something from centuries ago, but it happened in my lifetime.
Yeah, almost like out of the Bible. Really.
It sounds very similar to like something out of the Bible. And I told Paul that, and he wrote that song "So in Love"
after that story.
How
about that?
Yeah. So I don't always maximize my opportunities as a songwriter.
Yeah.
But at least it was a beautiful story, and it continues to illuminate whatever life I've got left in me. That's a beautiful thing.
Well, man, I was going to ask you when a time you recall might have been that you were most proud to be from Mississippi, but that might be one of the answers.
That's certainly one of them. Absolutely, it is. But Jimmy and I, he worked my old "Back Where I Come From" song into our show, and we sang that every night and looked at one another every time we said "I'm an old Mississippian" in the end of the song. Even though in Chesney's version he had to say Tennessean, and I understand that.
Of course, creative license. Yeah.
And he sold 25 million of those, and I'm grateful.
Yeah.
And taught me something about songwriting too, because when I wrote that song, my hometown had 900 people. And when I said "paint your name on the water tank," it never occurred to me that anybody outside of those 900 people in Belmont would ever relate to that. I didn't know everybody had a water tank, and I didn't know everybody painted their name. I was not trying to be a universal songwriter. And somehow or other, Kenny heard my song, and he was thinking of his water tank in Luttrell, Tennessee.
Yeah.
And then 25 million of his fans attached their own water tank to it.
That's right.
And it taught me you can do something totally individual and internal that has a universality to it. And apparently that was the only way I was ever going to get that done. So I'm grateful that it accidentally happened with me. But that did teach me something.
Yeah.
But getting to look at Jimmy every night when we sang that song together is a moment.
Man.
Because we never stopped grinning about it ever.
Yeah.
And we got a chance to brag on Mississippi, in every continent except Africa. I did it in Antarctica.
Wow.
I've been an ambassador of Mississippi in more places. They may not want me representing them, but they haven't shut me up.
That's pretty cool. That's some frontier stuff right there.
It was right here in the Mississippi Delta where more than 100 years ago, Black sharecroppers and laborers gave America its own musical identity. Drawing on the sounds and traditions of their native Africa and the struggle of their American experience, the blues was born. This land was the epicenter of musical creativity, offering Saturday night liberation and salvation on Sunday morning. The sounds of Mississippi gave rise to gospel, gave country music its twang, gave R&B its soul, jazz its blue note, and rock and roll its king. If you love music, there's no better place to discover its roots and its future than in Mississippi, the birthplace of America's music.
So I read somewhere that the last song you ever sang with Jimmy was also the first song you sang with him. It's My Job.
Yeah, it was. That was the first song we ever sang together. He had told me he was going to sing some of my songs, and I'd gone and sat in with him a couple of times. But he made a record in Muscle Shoals called Coconut Telegraph, that album, and I had just put out my third album, which had "It's My Job" on it. And we tend to think in music business. I wrote a song that sounds like Jimmy Buffett, so I'll pitch to him. Jimmy was a fan of writers who wrote something that he wouldn't have written.
Yeah.
We cut a lot of Bruce Coburn songs because Bruce had a whole other vantage point on the world that just tickled Jimmy's brain in a great way, and he loved his. Jimmy wouldn't have written "It's My Job," but he loved that song, and that's the first song we sang together. J.D. Souther and I did the harmonies on that in Muscle Shoals when we cut that record. And when they called me and said, "You need to come tomorrow and say goodbye to Jimmy," that's the
song, y'all.
That's the song. He's sitting in the bed, and his last gig, he came and sat in at one of my gigs. I opened for his last show, and he came and sat in with me, just a gig I was playing close to where he lived in the Hamptons at that time. He flew over to Rhode Island and did 8 songs with me, and he could barely walk, and he did it against the doctor's orders, and was the happiest man in the world.
Just to share that kind of joy is pretty. It's almost like he was Santa Claus in a way. Few people are responsible for creating that much happiness. And in that song, I think about the line, "It's my job to be different than the rest, and that's enough reason to go for me. It's my job to be better than the best, and that's a tough break for me." And I was going to ask you, but you've been answering these questions before I ask them, what do you think Mississippians do better than the best? I think you just answered it, though, because Jimmy getting on that plane when he could hardly walk and showing up for his friend.
Yeah.
Your neighbors planting those peanuts.
Yeah.
And then the storytelling. I would think showing up for your neighbor and telling stories are two of the things that Mississippians do better than the best.
I think there's probably some reason that everybody should be proud of where they come from, but the fact that those are attached to where we come from makes me feel particularly special. Like I'm so lucky to have landed where I landed, among the people that I landed among. It fueled and informed everything that I've done since then, and it will never stop. And it's a creative. I'm going to call it a true South.
Yeah,
it's not true North for me, because North doesn't mean as much to me as South does. But it is the center of what I do, and because I could see that whole little microcosm world that I lived in.
Yeah.
It lets me show respect to everybody in it, or at least know that it's right to, whether you always get it right or not. Yeah. I can hit back.
It's a compass.
Yeah, it is a compass.
Well, you said something about how Jimmy would find songs he loved and find a way to make those his own, and as opposed to the way it's normally done now, which is people know the persona that you've created and they write to that persona, and there's sort of almost an expectation now, if you're a big star, that your next record will be written for you because you've laid that blueprint out. But one of the beautiful things to me when I think about great artists, and Jimmy certainly fits this description perhaps better than anybody, I don't think he could have created his own universe of parrot heads and cheeseburgers in paradise and pirates and just this whole, because people don't go to a Jimmy Buffett concert. They plan a vacation. They plan a trip. It's an experience. It is a journey to a realm you can't access without those songs, without that attitude and energy. And if you look at Jimmy Buffett, not knowing where he's from, you might not draw the conclusion he's from Mississippi, because all of that furniture, if you will, there is a Gulf Coast and it's beautiful in Mississippi, but it's not the first thing you think of when you think Mississippi or when you think Jimmy Buffett, tying it back. But in a way, I think that reinventing yourself, I think about Willie Morris, famous author from Mississippi, My Dog Skip, and he talk about True South. He wrote a book called North Toward Home from when he lived in New York, a Mississippian far from home, and he reinvented himself. I've seen your career be a series of reinventing yourself time and again, but Jimmy Buffett reinvented himself.
Oh, yeah.
And that's, in a way, one of the most Mississippi things I think you can do.
For sure. Well, I've heard people say that Faulkner spoke with an English accent when he lived in Oxford. and I will say I was such a Beatle freak for a little while. They never let me talk on stage, but for a little while I had the worst English accent that's ever gone through a microphone right in Corinth, Mississippi, for sure. And that would have been a competitive thing as well. But and it was because I had such a regard for the Beatles. It didn't have anything to do with not being happy from Mississippi. I just thought they were a lot cooler than I was, so I tried to talk like them for a split second.
Yeah. Well, it's fun to dress up. I mean, it's fun to try on a different personality and everything. And yeah, I'm just kind of, I guess, curious about some of those times that you have found yourself in reinventing mode, or a way that you saw Jimmy carry his Mississippi with him, even if it wasn't in a way that the non-discerning eye could pick out.
He was always looking for the best story. Jimmy never sat down and said, I need to write a hit song in his life.
Yeah.
And he used to joke that he had maybe 1 3/4 hit songs in his life.
Yeah.
His career was not based off of hit singles.
Yeah. It was based off stories.
It was based off stories. And it was based off of this big ball of goodwill that just came forth out of him no matter what he was doing.
Yeah.
If you met him at a grocery store, you would have walked home happier than if you didn't meet him at a grocery store. And it was real enough that it keeps on going. You know, we're still playing to his fans because they've been going for 40 plus years, and they want to feel like that again. It's a family reunion.
Yeah.
When we play, and the Coral Reefer Band is a second family to all of us, of people that he selected not to do a specific task other than to do what he liked about them. Mm-hmm. I like that person. I want that person
be
to
you.
Go be you. Everybody,
and do it in a way that spreads joy.
And I don't think there's another band in the world that has a steel guitar and a steel drum player. We call it our steel section.
Yeah. Oh, I love that.
And no two different guys than Robert Greenidge and Doyle Grisham, but they are a thing, and we are a thing sonically that Jimmy dreamed up. He wanted to hear steel drums and steel guitars.
Yeah.
And and he made that happen. He wanted to hear steel drums and Tahitian choirs. He went to Bora Bora and heard those choirs over there. I want to hear that and steel drums, and that became one particular harbor. And whether or not that's ever a hit song, that is a thing that nobody else did except him.
Yeah.
Like you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
My reinventing myself probably has more to do with whatever limitations that I was not comfortable with. I always wanted to be a higher singer than I am. I wanted to be better at everything than I am at it. I want to get better.
I can relate to that feeling.
And that was it caused anxiety in my early age, and ever since for the last 25 years or so, I embrace wanting to get better. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people in our business, particularly that have any measure of success, don't worry about getting better after they're 35. Not many people get much better after they're 35. Yeah. So and I've been past 35 for 3 decades now, and the fact that I'm still trying to get better, whether I'm succeeding or not, puts me in a smaller category.
Yeah.
The ones of us that are still trying to beat something better out of ourselves. It makes me feel special in a way that I didn't when I just felt like I wasn't a good enough singer or I wasn't a good enough guitar player yet. I still sort of feel that way. I feel barely adequate to most of the tasks that I'm given, but I love going at them. I love trying to get better tomorrow than I was yesterday.
I think it speaks to that sort of the work as the reward mentality, and I can relate to that. My dream is that every 10 years I can look back and cringe a little bit, but still be proud. I want, and to look ahead 10 years and have, man, hopefully by then I'll be really good at this, or that'll be my next passion project. And
I identify with that, and I'm also energized by the fact that I know the degree to which I suck at everything else.
Well, I would beg to differ on some of that. Man, I'm going to let you out of here for too much longer, but I have to make sure I can confirm a few facts that I've read about you on the internet.
All right.
And one being that I read that you were born in the same doctor's office as Tammy Wynette, another person with some Mississippi, Alabama blurred line.
Tammy's from Tremont, Mississippi.
Okay.
And I'm from Belmont, Mississippi. And we had in common that neither of our hometowns had a doctor's office.
Okay.
And so you had to go across the state line to Red Bay to Dr. Dempsey's office and get born. And
well, thank you, Dr. Dempsey, for giving us a couple more names we could collect.
And Wette Pew.
Yeah.
That was Tammy's name.
Wette Pew.
Yeah. Supposedly she went to Country Boy Eddie's Birmingham morning TV show, and he asked her what her name was, and she was going to sing a couple of songs, and she said, Wette Pew. And he said, no, it's not. So, and they supposedly renamed her at like 5 a.m. on a local TV show in Birmingham.
Wow. That is something right there.
And McAnally is just a total porcupine of a name, and I'm a junior. My name is Lyman Corbett McAnally Jr.
Okay.
My dad was named after a preacher and a boxer.
Oh, wow.
And I tell everybody we're a violently religious family. But that ought to have been enough porcupine of a name to keep me from ever being notable at anything on earth.
Yeah.
But they called my daddy Mac, and I was Little Mac. Still in Belmont, I'm Little Mac.
Yeah.
If I'd have had a 2-syllable Garth Brooks kind of name, I'd have been in past tense a long, long time ago, and I'm still here talking to you. So it's a good thing I got all that.
Well, I like the rhythm. Talk about speaking having melody. I think Mac McAnally's got a nice melody to it.
Well, I'm grateful.
So, all right, before you get out of here, I wanted to ask you a couple things just about Mississippi and in general. And one being, if you could convince someone who had never been to come to Mississippi, what's the first place, the one place maybe, but certainly the first that you would want them to visit, and why?
We have notable stuff. Obviously, where the Grammy Museum is, all that Delta that the blues came out of. I'm from the other side of the state. I had this conversation with Wynton Marsalis because we started playing and we had a little pocket going, and he was bragging on the reefers that were playing with him, and he said, "I know Ralph McDonald, I know Robert Greenidge." And "Where in the hell are you from?" He pointed at me, and I said, "I'm probably from the wrong side of Mississippi." He says, "You're from the right part of Mississippi as far as I'm concerned." But my line was, I said, "Well, I'm not really so much from the part that created the blues. I'm probably more from the part that caused it."
Well, look, I grew up in Grenada, right at the edge of hill country, and there's hill country blues.
Oh,
and
yeah, absolutely.
Those pine hills are magic, man. And I would be hard pressed to answer that very question. We've asked a few people at this point now.
Where I was headed without ever actually getting to the answer, and I apologize about that, is that I'm partial to where I came from, because it means so much to me.
Of course.
And those people mean so much to me. And I root just as much to the people at the far south end of the state, whereas Jimmy says the more fun part of Mississippi, closer to the saltwater, which I can't promise you how high of a bar that is to clear, but it probably is. We're the Bible Belt up at the top for sure.
Yeah.
And he made a little fun of us in that regard. But I root for everybody from the whole state. But my heart is up there in the northeast corner.
Yeah. Well, where should someone eat if they're up near Belmont in the northeast corner? They got a spot?
Well, yeah, we got spots.
Or maybe what dish to look for? Maybe it doesn't matter about the place as much. But is there?
Well, chicken and dumplings. You know,
okay.
You'll know about some people if you. And you won't get bad chicken and dumplings anywhere for miles in there. And
that's good to know.
And not everybody knows what that is.
That's true. Not everybody does. So what is it about Mississippi that you believe makes it the birthplace of America's music?
I joke in my show that spare time is our major export, and I don't know that that's the truth, but that's probably an ingredient. The space that we have to develop imagination. The fact that I was around these storytellers growing up makes me see stories. I hear 2 lines of conversation, Walgreens in Portland, and I see a story.
You picked up that blueprint from those preacher competitions where they didn't solve the equation for you; they left it to you to.
Yeah, the ones that are just trying to scare you to heaven out of hell, that didn't make the impression on me that they would have wished.
Yeah.
Although I'm plenty scared.
Yeah.
but I was before they did that.
Yeah.
But the ones that let me feel involved intellectually in drawing the conclusion made more of an impression. Yeah. And I've tried to utilize that some in my songwriting and to a lesser degree in the way that I play. Yeah. Some of us are able to convey a little bit of our personality in what we play. Mm-hmm. And I'm not a great guitar player, but I have a little bit of that. You can tell a little bit about what kind of person I am from. Yeah.
Well, I would beg to disagree there, but I can relate in that one of my favorite guitar players is Pop Staples, who grew up in Mississippi, and he was known to volunteer that he had limitations as a player, but therein, it left him backed into the corner of my personality is all I got. Yeah. In a sense, and my spirit, my emotion,
and is there.
And if that ain't what matters most, I don't know what does. Because you can play all the hot licks in the world and not make somebody feel something.
That's the truth. And for somebody that felt all those limitations, there's a whole bunch of people that have imitated Pop Staples since then.
Yeah.
That wouldn't have known to do that if he hadn't done it.
Well, I'll leave you with this question then. If you don't mind, I'd love to hear a song from you. But let's say you got 4 spots. Who is on your Mississippi Mount Rushmore?
Oh, good Lord.
It's hard to narrow down. I have finally come up with my answer, but it leaves out
you
so
took a running
much.
start. Yeah, there's so many.
I'll give you my answer because you're on it. But
All right.
I had to take the approach of I know there's no way I can convey the full scope of Mississippi and its influence in music in 4 spots. But when I think about my story and the records I learned to play to, and the stories and the lives I pointed to and said I want to follow that or take notes from that. Right. For me, it's Marty Stewart.
Yeah.
B.B. King,
mm-hmm.
Pop Staples, and you.
My
goodness. That is my 4.
Well, I'm getting redder than I was a second ago. And I start out fairly red. It used to be really red. You know. I saw myself in a camera at Walgreens the other day. They got those little cameras at the. I said, "Looks like I'm wearing a chin strap." Oh. But anyway. BB is a big influence on me because he could sing with the guitar.
Yes.
You could hear vocals. And Jimmy Rogers, although I didn't, I had to go backwards into his music. He was enough before my time. Faulkner. I initially wanted to be a prose writer, and then I realized how far I was, from when they showed me some of that. He's writing about the same part of state that I lived in, and he did it at a level that I could never see myself arriving at. But I took some of my what would have been probably mediocre short stories and cooked them down into a reduction sauce of a 3.5-minute song with a little finger picking in it.
Yeah,
and it got a little more impressive.
Yeah,
I'm not willing or able to say that I think they're impressive standalone, but they got more impressive than it was as prose.
Sure.
And that's part of, that's part of what I still get to do at this point.
Yeah.
You
got one left. So you got Faulkner, BB, Jimmy Rogers.
Well, I mean, let me, it's my Aunt Mavorine McAnally married Flavis Presley.
Okay.
So for spreading the word on Mississippi, I guess I'll throw Elvis in there.
That's hard. That's a good one to put in.
Although Jimmy, Jimmy Buffett personally with me would be the biggest one. I love Marty Stewart, and I love what a historian he is and an ambassador for our state. You're 100% right about that. But we got Faith Hill. We got there's so many folks that have come out of there, and you're doing a fine job, and you're not just doing it with your hands and your singing voice. You're here talking us up.
Well,
and I'm proud to be here with you talking us up.
Thank you, Mac. I'm proud to sit here with you. It's opened up my heart and made it full sitting here. Would you bless us with a song?
Well, we'll have to retrospectively find out whether it's a blessing or not, but I'll play something.
Okay. I'll get this.
I say this in my show. Growing up in the northeast corner of the state, there was 900 people in my hometown when I landed there. And we had one traffic light and one wild girl, which I say that in my show too, one yellow page at the time. They don't even do yellow pages anymore. And then in northeast Mississippi, we blamed everything generally on the devil and specifically on New Orleans. Yeah. And so I grew up with hard feelings about New Orleans.
Okay.
Scared of it. And until I met Buffett, and he took me to New Orleans and he showed me some places to eat and some places to listen to music, and he taught me in less than 24 hours that I had an incorrect opinion of New Orleans. So this little song, for some reason or other, that's popped in my head today is a written apology to the city of New Orleans for what I incorrectly thought for the first 19 years I was here. This is a list of good things that you can blame on New Orleans. I like the morning, fond of afternoons, I love the evening, but it's over too soon. What's wrong with me? I blame it on New Orleans. I like hot sauce, love that southern style, try to find a way every day to smile, quite honestly. I blame it on New Orleans. Oh, some people find disturbing what goes on down on Bourbon. Beats all you ever saw. except for Mardi Gras, and that's a whole other thing. I like the people, make the most of life, take a real good thing and bam, add a little spice, but that's just me. I blame it on New Orleans. I like the ladies, hey, what's not to like? And on occasion when they act unladylike, historically, they blame it on New Orleans. I like music, blues and Dixieland. I play air trombone, the Preservation Hall Band. Categorically, I blame it on New Orleans. Nola, the Cafe Du Monde and Mothers, the Cape Paul and all the others. I never get my fill, and I never will, no sir. The whole world can sing, the saints go marching in. It won't be long, they're gonna march again. You wait and see. I blame it on New Orleans. There will come a day, I'd like to think, when war's a song and hurricanes a drink eventually. Let's blame it on New Orleans. Hey, don't blame me, blame it on New Orleans. New Orleans.
Yeah, man. Ladies and gentlemen, that's Mac McAnally. Thank you so much.
Appreciate it, Charlie. Thank you a bunch.
Mississippi on the Map is made possible by Visit Mississippi. Please like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts to be the first to know about new episodes when they drop.